Good night. Outside, the world keeps going. But here, at this moment, everything slows down. You don't need to see anything. Just listen. If you want, you can turn off the lights. Put your cell phone aside. Close your eyes and just breathe. Time in this place is different. Today's story carries an ancient secret. It's called the Egyptian secret of the creation of the world. A myth that doesn't begin with light, nor with sound, nor with order. It begins with silence and with water. If, in the end, you feel that this trip made sense, you can subscribe to the channel, but only if you like what I do here. So, the story begins. In the beginning, there was only none. An ocean without shore, without bottom, without form, still water, without reflection. A thick silence that filled everything. No stars, no sounds, no distinction between time and space. It wasn't exactly empty. It was more like a potential I didn't yet know I had. A presence that had forgotten itself. Inside, there was no up or down, no sky or earth, just an eternal plunge into absolute darkness. And it was in this silence that something happened. Not a sound, not an explosion, but an almost imperceptible gesture. Consciousness. From the vastness of the none, Atum emerged. A being who created himself. He was not begotten. He was not born. He simply appeared. Atum was unique. He knew he existed, but he did not know what that meant. There were no mirrors, no other being to compare himself to. He floated in the immensity. He thought. He felt. And deep down, he feared, because existing alone is different from existing. It is being trapped inside yourself. So Atum did what he could. He tried to expand. From himself, he created 2 children. Shu, the air. Tefnut, the moisture. In doing so, he broke a little. He divided what was indivisible, not out of generosity, but out of attempt, like someone shouting to hear the echo. Shu and Tefnut began to circle the nun. Timid, tenuous. The air danced with humidity, and the chaos began to have small rhythms. But too soon, the 2 of them were gone and lost. Atum then felt fear he knew no name for. He looked for his children. He searched everywhere in the infinite waters. The immensity of the nun seemed greater than before, and the panic grew. When he finally found them again, Atum cried. The tears fell on a land that did not yet exist, and from those tears, humans were born. They were created not as a glorious inheritance, but as an expression of divine relief, an emotional sigh of reunion. Atum did not stop there. He created more. The sky and the earth, Geb, the ground, Nut, the firmament, and Shu, the air, was placed between them, separating the couple. They wanted to touch each other, but were kept apart, not out of malice, but out of necessity. The space between Nut and Geb was necessary. In that gap, everything was born. The stars, the wind, the plants, the ideas, and there also appeared the gods, who would come later. But that would still take time. For now, there was just this slow, melancholy beginning. The listener is still there, floating in that moment before time. The world is still colorless, but there is already form. There is already movement, the first gesture of a universe that, like Atum, just wanted not to be alone. And maybe, deep down, this story is not just an ancient myth. Maybe it is a memory from a time when everything was silent, and the first sound was a thought. In the silence before time, Atum hovered over the nun. He existed, but he did not understand himself. He was a complete being, and yet incomplete. His birth was not celebrated. There was no one who could see him, nor who could name him. The nun did not react to his presence. He remained motionless, indifferent. Atum then thought. He thought too much. He was the only consciousness floating in an ocean of oblivion. Creating, for him, was not an act of power. It was a reflection of anguish, an attempt to find himself. His solitude was as deep as the nun, but unlike the water that surrounded him, Autumn knew he was alone, and that hurt. Without another, without reflection, he did not know who he was. Time did not yet exist. Space did not exist either, but there was this strange presence, feeling itself, desiring something it could not yet name. He was not a god as we understand it today. He had no throne, no form. He was pure intention. And with this intention, Autumn did the unthinkable. He created. From himself he drew Shu, the air, and then Tefnut, the moisture. It was not a birth, nor a gesture of beauty. It was an effort, a rupture. He broke himself so as not to disintegrate. Shu was light, invisible. Tefnut, moist, dense. They completed each other, like the first polarities of the universe. But as soon as they emerged, they began to move. They did not know where they were. They had no ground or direction, and they moved away. Autumn watched them disappear into the folds of chaos. The fear returned, greater than before. It was the fear of having lost what he had created, of having failed. He, who had come from nothing, now felt the risk of returning to nothing. So, he searched. For ages. He searched in every direction. The nun was no help. Everything looked the same. Nothing reflected anything. No difference. Only the sound of his own thoughts. Finally, when Shu and Tefnut reappeared, Autumn wept, and those tears fell with the weight of creation. It was from tears that humans emerged. Fragile, limited beings, but full of sensations, like small emotional echoes of that moment when Autumn finally felt something beyond his own existence. He did not create us out of practical necessity. He created us as relief, as an outlet, and then consciousness expanded again. Autumn felt that something greater was possible, but I also knew that I could no longer do it alone. Shu and Tefnut were now continuing the creation. Together, they gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky, an inseparable couple. They loved each other so much that they lived glued together, with no space between them, and in this endless embrace, nothing could be born. The world was suffocated by too much togetherness. Autumn then ordered, Shu, separate them. It was the first intervention, the first command, and Shu, obediently, lifted Nut high and pushed Geb down. He separated heaven and earth with his own body. He created space. He created the world as we know it, but in the act of separation, lamentation was also born. Geb and Nut loved each other, and what for Autumn was balance, for them was loss. The sky began to cry in the form of rain, the earth in the form of seeds, and between the two, the air carried messages, dreams, omens. The universe now had shape, layers, movement. There was pain, yes, but also possibility. Autumn withdrew. He did not disappear, but he stepped aside, like a creator watching from afar. The center of creation was no longer him. It was the space between, the necessary void between touch and absence. The Egyptians looked to the sky and knew that was Nut, arched over the world, protecting everything, and on the ground, they knew it was Geb, lying silently, guarding seeds and the dead, and the air between them, Shu, holding everything up with invisible effort. This seemingly simple structure carries the basis of cosmic order, the space between what is loved, the interval that allows life to breathe. And at the heart of this story, there was a question. How far can a being go to not be alone? Creation had begun, but it was far from stable. The newborn universe was fragile. The first gods, though divine, carried strangely human feelings. Fear, desire, jealousy, attachment. Shu kept the sky separate from the earth, but this effort required constancy. He stood with his arms raised, holding Nut above Geb. Without rest, without relief, it was an eternal gesture, and therefore solitary. Shu was not a warrior, nor a king. He was a pillar, invisible, necessary. He supported the cosmos without recognition, and perhaps because of this, he began to wonder if it was all worth it. Tefnut, her sister and companion, wavered between presence and absence. Like moisture, she spread without clear form. She felt lost between domains. She was neither heaven nor earth. She was not firm like Shu, nor passionate like Geb and Nut. She was fluid, and because of that, she was often forgotten. But without her, nothing grew. No life emerged. She was the condition for everything to flourish, although almost no one noticed. Geb, the earth, was stable, but not immobile. Within his body slept mountains, rivers, deserts. He felt everything that was above him, and he also felt longing. Ever since Shu lifted Nut away, Geb had remained lying down, looking up, longing for the touch of the companion that the sky carried. Nut, the sky, arched over everything, watched the world in silence. Every night she swallowed the sun, and every morning she gave birth to it again. She was mother of the day and mistress of the darkness. Her arms touched the horizon, her feet stepped beyond the desert. But even in this vastness, Nut was lonely. Above all, she wanted what had been taken from her. Contact with Geb, their love was forbidden. Adam, when ordering their separation, was not cruel, but functional. He knew that the world needed space. That desire, when suffocated, prevents creation. But the price of this order was constant longing, and Nut, in her sadness, began to do something that not even the gods could explain. She hid stars. She created small points of light on her body at night, as if she were sewing memories. They said that each star was a sigh, a memory of Geb, which she tried to keep while she could not touch him. The Egyptians looked to the sky and saw Nut silently carrying her children of light. And then came the moment of transgression. Nut became pregnant. Even though Adam had ordered her not to have children with Geb, the world was still too young. But Nut disobeyed, and since there were not enough days on the calendar for her to give birth, she made a deal with Thoth, the god of wisdom. Thoth, with his cunning, gambled with the moon, and won 5 extra days. Days that did not belong to any month. Days that escaped time. And in those days, Nut gave birth to 5 children: Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. These children would be the future of the world, but they would also carry all the conflicts of the gods who created them. In them there was love, envy, rivalry, betrayal. They were born in the midst of drama, and perhaps because of that, they reproduced the drama with even more force. The fragility of the first gods was not a flaw. It was a mirror, a reflection of their own existence. The Egyptian world did not see its gods as perfect. It saw them as powerful, yes, but full of nuance. The gods felt, they made mistakes, they loved and lost, and precisely for this reason, they could be understood. Atum, upon seeing his grandchildren born outside of time, knew that the world was no longer his. He had started the cycle, but now the cycle had a will of its own. Creation continued without him at the center, and that was good, and also sad. The fragility of the first gods, after all, was the first lesson of existence. Even the eternal must deal with the unexpected. Nut had disobeyed a sacred order, not out of rebellion, but out of impulse. Out of love, she became pregnant with Geb. Even after the separation imposed by Adam, creation was still fragile, and divine children could unbalance what had barely begun to form. Therefore, Adam had forbidden Nut to give birth on any of the 360 days of the calendar. But Nut was the sky, and the sky, though contained, always finds cracks through which to pour itself. It was then that Thoth, god of writing, wisdom, and subtle strategies, entered the scene. He was not a god of strength or fame, but he knew how to bend time. He challenged the moon to a game of dice, a game that only a calculating spirit could win, and he won. She gained 5 extra days from the moon, days that did not belong to any month, to any cycle, days that escaped Adam's eyes, days where Nut could give birth in secret, like someone who sows children between the cracks of the world. On the first of these days, Osiris was born. His cry seemed to carry the memory of all the waters of Nun. On the second, Isis. Her eyes were attentive from the beginning, as if she already knew that love would come with pain. On the third, Set, restless, born with the desire to stand out even before he knew how. On the fourth, Nephthys, silent, almost invisible, but full of hidden gestures. And on the fifth, Horus the Elder, a more solar god, destined to disappear little by little, like an idea that precedes the main story. These 5 children were born out of time, and perhaps for this reason, they never fit right into the world. Each one of them carried a trace of brokenness, a reflection of forbidden love, an echo of deviation. Adam, upon discovering the birth, did not punish Nut directly, but he did not celebrate his grandchildren either. His time as the center of creation was ending. History was now expanding beyond his control, and that left him silent. Nut, in turn, embraced her children with the immensity of the sky. She knew that what she had done could not be undone, and in her heavenly heart she held a premonition. Those 5 would not bring peace. Geb watched everything with gravity. Like Earth, he received the steps of these new gods. He felt the weight that each one left on his body. Osiris walked lightly, as if he were blooming. Isis walked with purpose, as if she already carried a destiny. Set stepped firmly, with contained anger. Nephthys barely touched the ground, and Horus, finally, seemed like a reflection of the sun itself. These children, although brothers, were not raised as equals. They grew up amidst tensions. Osiris was admired, Isis, beloved, Set, envious, Nephthys, forgotten, Horus the Elder, already surpassed by a Horus who did not yet exist. The seeds of conflict were planted, and the garden seemed too beautiful to be trusted. Osiris quickly stood out. He had charisma and a sense of order. He inspired confidence. The older gods saw in him a rare balance, a promise of continuity, and so he was chosen to rule Egypt, the center of the world. But Set, his brother, did not accept. How could one born in the same womb, at the same stolen time, receive the throne while he remained in the shadow? How could anyone be less when all were born from the same error? Set began to entertain thoughts. He didn't talk much, but he observed, and little by little, the ideas became intentions, the intentions, plans. Nut felt it, but she could no longer intervene. It was heaven. All she could do was cover the world with silence and hope. The forbidden children, now grown up, carried with them the truth of the world. Everything that is born out of time comes with a price, and that price would soon be charged. Osiris assumed the throne of Egypt with a calmness that seemed natural. He had not been chosen by force or dispute. He simply became. There was something about his presence that calmed, that organized. He spoke, and others listened, not with fear, but with attention. His manner was firm, but calm. Order seemed to grow around him, like a fertile field. They say that His arrival on the throne was not marked by grand coronations, but by a change in climate. The ancient chaos of the world began to recede. The waters behaved, plants sprouted, men, still young on earth, learned to plant, to measure, to respect the cycle of floods. Osiris taught without haste. His government was a kind of care, as if he understood that leading is not about commanding, but about sustaining. He organized the laws, established the rituals, and gave form to the cult of the dead. He brought meaning to existence and honor to death. Egypt, under him, seemed to breathe easier. At his side, Isis. She was not just his sister, she was his companion in everything. Osiris was king, but Isis was the spirit that kept the flame burning. Intelligent, devout, charming. She knew how to listen, she knew how to act. The two formed an axis, a symbolic center of balance between action and intuition, between strength and mystery. But not everyone saw this in a positive light. Set, the brother, watched everything from afar. On the outside, silent. On the inside, boiling. It was too easy for Osiris, too natural, as if the world had bent itself. Set, on the other hand, had always felt out of place. He was the god of storms, of the desert, of things that didn't fit in. While Osiris was revered, Set was feared. While one was cultivated as wheat, the other was remembered as thunder. He didn't just want respect, he wanted centrality. He wanted to be seen as necessary, not as an exception. At first, he tried to ignore it. He tried to convince himself that it didn't matter. But with every gesture of reverence to Osiris, his hurt grew. It was like living in the shadow of a tree that never bears fruit for you, and the shadow turned to anger. Osiris, on the other hand, did not see this. Not because he was naive, but because he trusted. He still believed that good would spread itself, that by doing the right thing, the world would respond with justice. But the Egyptian world was not just about fertility. There were also dunes, sand, dry winds that whispered bad things. Set began to move away from the palace. He went to the desert. He would not appear for days. Some said he was talking to himself, that he was hearing things. Others said he was planning. Isis noticed. She felt the vibration of his absence. She tried to warn Osiris, but he, with his typical serenity, said that it was just a phase, that Set would return, that everything would be resolved in time. But time does not heal what does not want to be healed. Set began to spread doubts. He started small, a comment here, a provocation there. He spoke of how Osiris was too fragile to rule, how order could be a prison, how the world needed strength, not harmony. Some listened, others laughed, but the idea was planted. Set was the kind of god who knew how doubt grows, how it infiltrates, how it contaminates. He didn't need a crowd. He needed cracks, and they began to appear, small tensions, sideways glances. The kingdom remained firm, but something had changed. Osiris, however, continued. He ruled with dignity, believing that harmony would prevail. But the desert was moving, and the desert was Set. Set did not strike immediately. He knew that the most effective blow is not the one that comes with fury, but the one that comes with a smile. While Osiris ruled by trusting in order, Set planned in silence. He waited, he watched, and when everything seemed too calm, he decided to act. The opportunity came at a banquet, a celebration of some sort, one of those held to commemorate the kingdom's abundance. Everyone was present, gods, nobles, important figures. It was the kind of party that celebrated not only the harvest, but the stability that Osiris represented. It was then that Set appeared with a gift, a wooden box, richly crafted, the edges painted with gold details, the lid carved with cosmic shapes, an object as beautiful as it was mysterious. He stood up in the middle of the party, holding the gift in front of everyone. With a jovial, almost comical tone, he said that he had ordered that box especially, but with one detail: it would only fit perfectly to someone whose body fit exactly inside it. Laughter. Curiosity. The box was passed around among the guests. One by one, they tried to lie down in it, some for fun, others for vanity, but none of them fit. Too big, too small, too narrow, until it was Osiris's turn. Isis looked at him, a second of hesitation, but Osiris, as always, trusted. There was no malice there, he thought. It was just a game. He lay down, and his body fit perfectly. It was at that moment that everything changed. Set did not smile. He did not hesitate. He quickly closed the lid of the box. He sealed it with iron nails. He poured molten lead over it. The muffled sound of astonishment was swallowed up by the speed of the act. The box became a coffin. No one reacted in time. The shock paralyzed even the gods. Set ordered the box to be thrown into the Nile, and so they did. Osiris, the peaceful king, the orderly, the cultivator, was swallowed up by the waters of the river. The party fell silent. Isis, astonished, did not cry immediately. She did not scream. She left, like someone who loses the word before the tears. Set took the throne, not by acclamation, not by destiny, by emptiness. His government began there, not with construction, but with destruction. Egypt felt it. The flooding of the Nile was delayed. The soil became drier, the air heavier. It was not just the death of Osiris. It was the breaking of a silent promise he had carried. Isis, in turn, began to search. She did not accept the end. She did not accept the lost body. She knew that in order to start something over, it was necessary to restore it. She wandered through Egypt, disguised, invisible, silent. She searched for the box, the body, the remains, not to avenge, but to understand, to put things back together. While Set celebrated his victory, Isis was stitching together a plan, made of pain, love, persistence. The myth had now changed. It was no longer a creation. It was a fall, a loss, a mourning. And like all mourning, it would come with consequences. Isis did not cry in front of anyone. She did not beg for justice. She did not shout against Set. She did not seek allies. She left the court in silence, as if carrying in her eyes a mission that has not yet been formed. Osiris's body was lost, and she knew that without him, the world would never be the same again, not just because of longing, but because of balance, because of meaning. Osiris's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was a cosmic rupture. The natural order, the cycle of life and death, had been violently disrupted. Egypt was in mourning, though it could not say why. The Nile murmured more quietly. The plants grew more slowly. Something unseen had broken. Isis began her journey without a map. She listened to rumors, signs, and legends from the villagers. She walked along the banks of the Nile, entered swamps, consulted minor gods, and braved deserts. Her pain was not loud. It was persistent. It did not rest. She knew that Osiris's body was not just flesh. It was a symbol, and symbols cannot be abandoned. It was in Byblos, far from Egypt, that she found the box. It was stuck in a tree trunk, absorbed into the wood, transformed into the pillar of a foreign palace. The tree had grown around it, as if trying to protect it. Isis did not ask. She did not demand. She disguised herself. She became the servant of the local queen. She worked in silence. She took care of the children in the house, told ancient stories, calmed night cries, until one night, revealed as a goddess, she asked for the box back. The queen, moved, gave in. Isis returned to Egypt with the body of Osiris, but peace was still far away. Set, upon discovering that his sister had recovered her body, was furious. He searched for it, and when he found it, he did not hesitate. He dismembered Osiris. He broke him into pieces. He scattered the fragments throughout the Nile, the desert, and the forgotten regions of the world. It was not enough to kill. It was necessary to disperse, but Isis did not give up. She started again. She searched piece by piece. She found legs, arms, ribs. She counted the bones. She put the parts together. In each village, she left a lament. Every place where a piece of Osiris was found became sacred. She was not alone. Nephthys, her sister, joined her. She was not a goddess of brilliance, but she knew how to be silent and act, and Anubis, the son of Nephthys and Osiris, joined them both. Together, they restored the body, not with blood, but with ritual, with sacred words, with ancient gestures. Isis whispered incantations, sewed the skin with time, covered the eyes with silence, and in a moment that no god has fully explained, Osiris was revived, but not to reign again. His place in the world had changed. Now he belonged to the underworld. He had become lord of the afterlife, king of the dead, guardian of what was to come. He did not return to Isis as before, but he returned, and that was enough. Before leaving for their new kingdom, Osiris and Isis united one last time, and from this union, a new god was born, a son made in secret, a hidden heir, Horus. Isis would hide him. She would raise him away from the eyes of Set. The boy would grow up in silence, in the swamp, far from the war, but he carried something of his father in his eyes, and in his heart, the promise of return. Horus was born in silence. There was no celebration, no procession. No major god was called to attend the birth. Isis was alone, hidden among the waters of the delta, surrounded by mud, tall plants, and murmurs of wind. The swamp hid her, like a mother protecting her nest. It was a damp, stuffy, dense place, and for that very reason, safe. No palace god would dare look for her there. Horus came into the world, small, fragile, defenseless, but his eyes carried something ancient, something that was not of this time. Isis held him as one who holds not only a son, but a symbol. He was not just the blood of Osiris. He was continuity. She knew that if Set found out, he would not hesitate. He would kill him before he could say a word. That is why Horus's childhood was filled with secrets. There was no golden cradle, no temples with hymns. There was silence, vigilance, and constant care. Isis was a mother, yes, but she was also a sentinel. She slept little. She ate enough. Always alert, always listening. The swamp seemed to understand. Wild animals did not come near. The waters kept their distance. The wind rustled the leaves, but never too hard. Horus grew up with the rhythm of the place. He learned from the sounds, from the smell of the mud, from the way the light passed through the leaves. There were no toys. There was observation. Isis told stories, stories of a father who had been king, of a brother who dethroned him, of a mother who rebuilt the impossible. Horus listened. He absorbed. He didn't say much, but he understood. Sometimes, he would ask why he couldn't go out, why the other boys played on the banks, and he couldn't. Isis would answer calmly. She would say that one day the world would know his name, but for now, he would have to wait, and Horus waited. But there were difficult days, days when fevers took hold of him. Isis despaired. There were no real remedies there. No god came to help. Once, a scorpion sting almost took him. Isis, in despair, ran to the nearest village, carrying the boy in her arms. Some women, without knowing who she was, helped. They gave water, herbs, prayers, and Horus survived. Isis returned to the swamp more carefully. She thanked him silently. She knew she could not count on luck forever. Meanwhile, Set reigned, but the throne did not fulfill him. It was a government of control, not harmony. The people obeyed, but did not sing. The rituals were performed out of obligation, not faith. Egypt survived, but without a soul. The priests remembered Osiris in silence. The harvests came, but without joy, and on the banks, a child grew who carried within him the echo of something ancient. Horus, the son of the dead king, the hidden heir, the secret that had not yet been told. Horus grew up as if he were on the edge of the world. He knew he was different, even if he didn't understand exactly why. The swamp where he lived was his silent kingdom, full of shadows, murmurs, and unspoken promises. Isis didn't treat him like a prince. She treated him like someone who needed to survive. Her care wasn't about pampering. It was about preparation. From an early age, Horus learned that his life was not his alone. He carried an inheritance, a debt, a name he could not yet pronounce out loud. He knew he had a father, but he could not remember. He knew there was a throne, but he had never seen it. He knew Set was the usurper, but he had never faced him. Isis educated him patiently. She did not fill him with hatred, but she did not spare the truth either. She told him what Set had done, how he had destroyed Osiris, how he had scattered his pieces, how he had assumed power with a smile that hid a dagger. But he also said that revenge was not enough, that justice was not achieved by force alone. Wisdom, firmness, and time were needed. Horus listened. He promised nothing, but he kept everything. He grew tall, thin, alert. His eyes seemed to see beyond the swamp, as if they observed not only the world, but also what the world hid. Anubis, the god who prepared Osiris for the underworld, sometimes visited the boy. He didn't say much, but he taught him gestures, rituals, the power of silence. Horus learned from him respect for the dead, the importance of names, the power of symbols. Isis knew that the time was approaching. The world was missing something. The people were restless. Set reigned, but the throne was heavy. Egypt needed balance. One day, when Horus was no longer a boy, Isis called him. She looked into his eyes with the firmness of someone who had waited her whole life for that moment. And she said, "It is time." He didn't ask where to go or what to do. He just nodded. The first time Horus emerged from the swamp, it was like a rebirth. The desert light seemed brighter than he remembered. The air was drier. The sounds were harsher. But he did not hesitate. He addressed the council of the gods. He gathered them together one by one. He introduced himself. He said his name. He told them his origins. He claimed the throne. Set was there. He laughed. He said that the boy was neither old enough nor strong enough to rule, that the throne was his by right of conquest. The gods hesitated. Some saw in Horus a reflection of Osiris. Others feared the unpredictable strength of Set, and so a trial began, a long battle, not only of words, but also of evidence, of symbolic, ritual, and magical disputes. Horus was not just a young man seeking revenge. He was the link between past and future, between order and scar. And now, finally, the world would see if he was ready to bear the weight of an ancient name. The council of the gods met in a place that was neither heaven nor earth, a liminal, sacred space where decisions shaped not only the fate of the gods, but the course of the world. Seated on thrones of time, each of them watched Horus and Set with ancient eyes. Ra, the sun, was there. Thoth, the mind. Mot, the order. Everyone knew that this was not just a throne up for grabs. It was the balance of the universe. Horus spoke first. His voice was firm. but without arrogance. He told of his origins. He explained Set's crime. He claimed the throne as the legitimate son of Osiris. He spoke little, but each word was heavy as stone. Set, in turn, responded with confidence. He said that he had held Egypt steady, while the other fled in the swamps. He called Horus a boy, inexperienced. He reminded him that he himself had faced chaos, that he had ruled with strength, that he had won. The gods listened. They debated, but they did not reach a verdict. So, they proposed tests, challenges. The first was symbolic. Both had to transform into hippos and submerge themselves in the Nile for hours. The one who resisted the longest would win. They both dove in, and the river became quiet. Isis, on the bank, was afraid. Her son was in the waters of the same river that had carried Osiris away. Set emerged first, panting, furious. Horus came out next, calm. Some gods saw a sign there. Others said it was luck. More trials came. Magical fights, transformations, games of cunning. Set tried to win by force. Horus, by strategy. One night, Set tried to seduce Horus. He wanted to humiliate him, reversing the roles of power. Horus resisted, but the episode became a murmur among the gods. The dispute was now not only physical, it was moral, symbolic, even sexual. Isis intervened. She tried to appeal to the council. She told them everything she had done to reunite Osiris. She wept, she pleaded. Some gods were moved. Others said it was unfair to involve emotions in cosmic judgment. Thoth, ever balanced, suggested that they consult Osiris. Yes, Osiris, the undead, the king of the underworld. A message was sent to the underworld, and Osiris answered. His voice did not come with sound. It came as wind, as memory. He said that the throne was not a prize. It was a duty, and that Horus bore it with truth. That touched the gods. Ra, reluctantly, finally accepted. The throne should be Horus's. Set was not punished, but he lost. Balance would finally be restored. The decision was made. Horus was the new king of Egypt. There was no celebration, no fanfare, just a firm silence, like when the desert realizes that the storm has passed. The throne, at last, returned to the lineage of Osiris. But it was not the same throne, nor was Horus the same young man who had emerged from the swamp. The struggle had shaped him, not just with pain, but with vision. Now he knew what it meant to hold the world with his own body. He knew that power came not from title, but from responsibility. The throne was prepared, a seat of dark stone. Simple, firm, Horus sat before the gods. Ra watched him with eyes that had seen 1,000 sunrises. Thoth nodded silently. Maat, the goddess of truth, was serene. Egypt breathed. The people returned to their rituals with faith. Crops grew with greater vigor. The Nile, which had been hesitant, began to flow regularly again. Horus did not rule like Osiris, nor like Set. He had his own way. He listened more than he spoke. He acted with consideration. He had learned over time that justice is not a matter of haste. Set did not disappear. He was integrated. He received a space in the pantheon. He continued to be the god of the desert, of storms, of ruptures, but now, without a throne. It was an unusual gesture. Horus could have eliminated him, but he didn't. He understood that chaos is not overcome with destruction. It is contained with balance, incorporated. This gesture redefined divine power. Before, the gods competed. Now, they understood that each one had a place, a function. Even conflict, if positioned correctly, helped to maintain order. Horus became a symbol of protection. His eye, wounded and later restored by Thoth, became an amulet, the Eye of Horus, a reminder that even what is lost can be healed. People began to call upon Horus for security, for justice, for courage in the face of uncertainty. He became more than a king. He became a bridge between heaven and earth, and Isis, now at peace, could rest. She had fulfilled her role. She rebuilt what was destroyed. She protected what was fragile. She waited for the right time. Ultimately, this story wasn't just about a throne. It was about continuity, about what happens when someone refuses to forget. And so, the cycle began again. The eye of Horus was not just a wound. It was a memory. During one of the confrontations with Set, Horus lost his left eye, a sharp pain, physical and symbolic. That which saw the world with balance was torn out. The vision was left incomplete. The universe, unbalanced. But what is broken can be restored. And Thoth, the god of wisdom, time, and writing, entered the scene. Thoth was not a hero, nor a warrior. He was one who observes, who waits for the right moment to speak. With calm hands, he gathered the pieces of the wounded eye, each fragment, each splinter. He reconstructed it with precision, with magic, with patience. The eye of Horus shone again, but not exactly as before. Now it bore a scar, and therefore wisdom. It became a symbol of restored vision, of power that does not forget pain. People began to use it as amulets. They drew it on tombs, on boats, on utensils. They called it Ujjat, which is complete. But it was more than protection. It was a reminder that true strength lies not in perfection, but in recovery. Thoth, in restoring the eye, not only healed, he recorded. He created time. He created writing. He created the order of the world based on what had been lost. The Egyptians understood this like few others. They knew that nothing is static, that even the gods suffer, that every order carries within itself the risk of rupture, and that true power is not preventing chaos. It is knowing what to do after it. Thoth kept the records, the decisions of the gods, the unspoken words. He was Ra's counselor, a judge in disputes, a scribe of the dead. While Horus reigned, Thoth preserved the invisible balance, that which is not seen, but sustains everything. His role was discreet, but essential. He taught men to count the days, to measure the stars, to interpret signs, and the eye of Horus, restored by him, became the secret map of reconstruction. Each part of the eye had a numerical value, fractions that added up to almost a whole. Almost. One part was always missing. The priests said it was this way on purpose, to remind us that totality only exists in myths. In the real world, something is always missing, and yet we carry on. This is the wisdom that time teaches, that Thoth represents, and that Horus carries in his eyes. Osiris did not return to life as before. His body was restored by Isis, yes, but time had already taken part of him. His breath no longer belonged to the world of the living. He walked, but his steps left no mark. He was among the gods, but no longer among the people. Osiris accepted this new role without revolt. He understood that the end was not a punishment, but a passage. His destiny was not the solar throne, but the invisible throne. He descended into the depths, not into hell, as other cultures would think, but into a silent realm, where souls await judgment, where time does not pass, but listens. There he became king of the dead, not as a cruel guardian, but as a serene judge, the first to die, the first to return. In the court of Osiris, hearts are weighed, not for actions alone, but for intentions. Maat, the goddess of truth, places her feather on the scales. If the heart is lighter, the soul moves on. If it is heavier, it is devoured by the monster Ammit. Osiris does not judge in haste. He listens. He feels. He knows the pain of those who have lived, for that reason he is fair. The Egyptian people did not fear Osiris. They prayed to him. They asked for passage, guidance, remembrance. He had become a symbol of hope. Death, under his rule, ceased to be an end. It became a transition. If Horus reigned among the living, Osiris reigned among the dead. Father and son in balance. Heaven and underworld respecting each other. This division was not a rupture. It was continuity. Funeral rituals were shaped by this myth. Bodies were prepared with care. They were wrapped, perfumed, and placed in tombs facing west, where the sun sets every day. Everything was done in order because death needed structure. In the tombs, the name of Osiris was written as protection, as a reminder, as a promise of return. And the dead, when they presented themselves before him, were not alone. They brought their deeds, their words, their silences. Osiris listens to everything. No rush, no automatic condemnation. He knows what it is to be broken and rebuilt, therefore. He is the fairest judge, and so his invisible kingdom became a reflection of the visible world, not as a copy, but as a foundation, because only those who understand death can truly value life. In Egyptian thought, nothing ever really ended. Everything followed a cycle. Life was just one stage. Death was another. And rebirth, inevitable. There was no rush, no anxiety. Time moved in circles, like the sun, like the Nile, like the body itself. Each morning was a rebirth. The sun died in the west, crossed the world of the dead, and was reborn in the east. It was Ra in his boat, facing the darkness, every day, to illuminate the world again. This cycle repeated itself without fail, and that is why the Egyptians trusted it. To die was not to be forgotten. It was to change one's state, to change one's form. Life was seen as a careful preparation for this crossing. The body was preserved, yes, but the most important thing was the soul, the Ka, the vital energy, the Ba, the personality, and the Ren, the name. The name maintained existence. Without a name, the soul was lost. That is why the Egyptians wrote their names on everything, on tombs, on amulets, on statues, as if the written word were an anchor to eternity. When someone died, there was a ritual. The body was washed, perfumed, and wrapped in linen. The entrails were stored in canopic jars. The heart was left in the chest. It was this heart that would be weighed before Osiris. The dead needed to know the hymns, the gestures, the sacred words. The Book of the Dead was their guide. It was not a closed book. It was a set of formulas, prayers, instructions for traversing the invisible world. Each soul was a boat, and each boat needed direction. Those who were righteous crossed the portals, faced judges, answered questions firmly, and in the end, they met Osiris. And if they passed the scales of Ma'at, they received rebirth, not as a return to earth, but as continuity. They lived in the reed field, an Egyptian paradise, a reflection of life, but without pain, without hunger, without loss. And so the cycle continued. The Nile reflected this thought in its rhythm of flood and drought, death and return. It disappeared, then returned, always renewed. Agricultural rituals imitated mythology. To plant was to bury, to harvest, to resurrect. Osiris was remembered in every seed. He dies so that something may grow. Horus in every young person who takes responsibility. Isis in every mother who protects in silence. Thoth in every writing, every number, every attempt to understand the world. And Set, even he had a place. He represented the necessary imbalance, the force that shakes so that things can be reordered. Nothing was thrown away. Everything was transformed. That was the secret. Not to conquer death, but to walk with it. Isis was not a goddess of thunder. She did not use a sword. She did not shout orders. She did not dominate through fear. Her power came from silence, from constancy, from the ability to remain. She was not the visible center of the myth, but she was the thread that held it all together. Since her first loss, she has not stopped. She has searched for the body of Osiris. She has rebuilt the impossible. She has hidden Horus. She has created him in secret. She has faced Set without facing him with weapons. She has resisted in other ways, with attentive eyes, with precise gestures, with faith that does not retreat. Her cult grew slowly. It was not born in temples, but in homes, in women who saw her as a mirror, in the people who saw hope in her. Isis did not promise easy victory. She promised fidelity. She became the patron saint of mothers, wives, healers, midwives, priestesses, and sailors. She was invoked at births and at wakes, during journeys, and for healing. She was seen as the one who knew the true names of things, and because of that, she had power over the invisible. His knowledge was intuitive. It did not come from formulas. It came from listening, from perception. She was a goddess of layers. She could be gentle, but she could also be ruthless. When Horus was wounded, she healed him with words that the gods themselves feared to speak. His silence was not weakness. It was concentrated strength. Isis taught that you don't need to be in the center of the scene to drive the story. She showed that firmness and tenderness could go hand in hand. In their temples, the rituals were delicate. The priests and priestesses sang hymns, offered flowers, incense, and milk. It was a sensorial cult, where contact with the sacred came through smell, light, and water. She became one of the most beloved deities. Over time, it crossed borders. It was worshipped in Greece, in Rome, in North Africa. In each place, it changed its form a little, but it maintained the same core, the ability to protect and restore. Isis was the guardian of the cycle, and his greatest gesture was to wait for the right time to act, waiting for the world to be ready to see what it had previously ignored. Isis's power was not visible, but it was what held everything together. Nephthys was never the center of the scene. She was never celebrated with pomp, nor called upon in the great hymns. Her name rarely appears among the great deeds, but she was always there. When Osiris was betrayed, it was she who helped Isis pick up the pieces. When Horus was wounded, it was she who brought silence around the pain. When the world needed order, it was she who stood on the sidelines, watching. Nephthys is shadow, not as absence, but as support, that which sustains without being seen. She was the sister of Isis, daughter of heaven and earth, mother of Anubis with Osiris, and yet she never claimed. She never demanded. Her role was that of guardian of the invisible. She represented the limits, what is not spoken, what is felt and kept inside. While Isis is the flame that persists, Nephthys is the cloth that covers, the mourning that protects. In funeral rites, her name was pronounced alongside that of Isis. The two mourned Osiris's death together. But while Isis wept with hope, Nephthys wept with acceptance. She understood that not everything comes back, that some losses are permanent, and so her mourning was necessary. Nephthys is remembered as the goddess of twilight, the moment when the light has withdrawn, but it is not yet night. This liminal moment was his domain. She moved between worlds. She wasn't just a sister, she was a constant presence between life and death. Anubis, her son, became the god who guides the dead. But his wisdom came from her, from the mother, who taught him to honor the end with respect. Nephthys did not have grand temples, but she was invoked in the most difficult passages. His name came in whispers, in prayers said through tears. She was a reminder and support. Many mistook her for sadness, but she was more than that. She was lucidity. He accepted what was, without trying to force what could not be. And this, in ancient Egypt, was seen as strength, because not all power needs to shine. Some sustain the world in the dark, and Nephthys was that, a foundation, draft, firm, present. Anubis was born from the silent union between Nephthys and Osiris. It was not the fruit of romantic love, nor of war. It was the result of a moment lost in the shadows. Nephthys disguised herself as Isis, or perhaps she simply took the place that was denied to her. Osiris touched her without knowing it, or perhaps he knew, and remained silent. And from that undefined night, the god who would care for the dead was born. Anubis never demanded recognition. He was raised by Isis, as if he were her own. She grew up between two mothers, one who gave her life, and the other who gave her the role. Her world was always between borders. Anubis was a god of silence, of precision. He made no promises, did not distribute blessings, but he ensured that the crossing was dignified. When someone died, he was the one who guided the soul. When the body was prepared, he was the one who observed every gesture. Mummification was not just a technique, it was a ritual, and Anubis was the invisible master of this process. Their eyes never wavered. The hands of the priests who wrapped the bodies in linen repeated ancient movements, as if each strip were a sacred phrase. The heart was left in the chest because it would be judged. The brain was discarded because the Egyptians believed that consciousness resided in the heart. Each gesture carried symbolism, and Anubis hovered over them all, not as an inspector, but as a guardian. He did not judge, he simply accompanied. His job was to ensure that the soul reached the court of Osiris with dignity, that it would not get lost along the way, that it would not be forgotten. The Egyptian people did not fear Anubis. They feared his absence. If he were not present, the passage could be interrupted. He was painted with the head of a jackal, an animal that prowls cemeteries, not as a threat, but as a vigilante. The jackal watches in silence, and when it moves, it does so with precision. Anubis was remembered in tombs, in small statues, in protective formulas. He was the first to be invoked in funeral rituals. His name came before Osiris, because without him, no one reached the court. He prepared, he cleaned, he protected. It was the first touch of the dead body and the last look before the crossing. His gestures were slow, never hurried. He knew that death does not accept haste. The Egyptians revered him, not for his power, but for his delicacy. He was the god who treated the dead with absolute respect, and because of that, the living trusted him. There was no shouting in their worship. There was silence and gesture. Anubis reminded that death can be honored, and that even the end deserves care. At the heart of the Egyptian myth, there was one certainty. No one escaped judgment. It didn't matter if they were king or peasant, priest or thief. The soul, upon leaving the body, had to face the tribunal of Osiris. This crossing was not a punishment. It was a necessity, a final stage before becoming eternal. But to pass, one had to have lived truthfully. The soul was composed of parts. The Ka, which was the life force. The Ba, which was the individuality, the essence that could fly like a bird. And the Ren, the name. All of these had to be whole. Upon arriving at the court, the dead man appeared before 42 judges. Each one had a question, each one representing a part of the cosmic balance. But the central scene was the scales. On one side, the heart of the dead. On the other, the feather of Ma'at. Ma'at was not just a goddess. She was the very idea of order, of justice, of truth. She represented what keeps the world in balance, what keeps everything from falling apart. The feather was light, yes, But it was not fragile. It was precise. The heart, in turn, was the center of consciousness. It held memories, desires, and regrets. If it weighed more than the feather, it was a sign that the deceased had strayed too far from the path. In these cases, the soul was not punished with torture. It was simply erased, devoured by Amit, a hybrid creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the rear end of a hippopotamus. Nothing about it was symbolic. It was the pure end. But if the heart were lighter or equal to the feather, the soul could follow. I walked towards Campo dos Juncos, a serene, fertile place where the righteous dead lived as they had lived in life, but without pain, without loss, without fear. For this, the dead person needed to know what to say. The formulas from the Book of the Dead were recited with precision. Phrases like, "I didn't steal, I didn't kill, I didn't lie," were said in front of each judge. But more than repeating words, they needed to be true. Mot was not deceived. Osiris watched everything with serene eyes. He did not judge in anger, he judged with measure. And Anubis, as always, was there, leading the soul, watching the scales, ready to accompany anyone who passed by. And in silence, say goodbye to those who couldn't make it. For the Egyptians, this judgment was not far off. It was expected. They were already thinking about the scale. They tried to follow Mot in life. Be fair, be balanced, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Order was not an obligation. It was a way of being in the world. And when death came, as it would for all, there was at least the hope of lightness. Mot does not shout. She does not demand. She does not appear in wars or in victories. But without her, nothing exists. Mot is the invisible order that sustains the world, the most silent and, at the same time, most powerful idea in Egyptian mythology, represented by a woman with a feather on her head. She is the very essence of balance. She is not just a goddess. She is a principle. Everything that works because of Mot. The movement of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, the germination of seeds, the permanence of the sky above the earth. She is in everything that repeats itself in harmony. When the gods created the world, they shaped it according to Mot. She did not come afterward. She already existed. She was the mold that chaos used to transform itself into reality. In the court of Osiris, it is his pen that measures hearts. But its weight is not physical. It is ethical. Being lighter than the feather means having lived with respect, with truth, with balance. The Egyptians did not see Mot as a commandment, but as a path, a kind of silent wisdom, learned by observation. Following Mot was acting with justice, yes, but also with care, with clarity of intentions. It was listening before speaking, waiting before judging. It was understanding that each gesture affects the whole. Even the pharaoh, the ultimate symbol of power, was called the one who lives according to Mot. The king did not create order, he maintained it. And if he walked away from her, everything would fall apart. In temples, in courts, in markets, Mot was remembered, not as dogma, but as direction. She was the moral center of the universe. And so, she was discreet. His power did not come from fear. It came from understanding. The priests taught that the world could be destroyed if Mot was broken, not by revenge of the gods, but because without it, everything falls apart naturally. Order needs to be cultivated like a plant, cared for, watered, protected, and unlike chaos, it does not impose itself. She invites. Mot is the opposite of Set, not because I hate him, but because it offers what he ignores, balance. While chaos demands, it sustains. While chaos stirs, she structures. And because of that, its strength is greater, because it remains. While everything changes, every morning the sun rises. Every day it crosses the sky. Every evening it disappears below the horizon. For the Egyptians, this movement was not simple. It was a sacred act, a crossing. Ra, the sun god, traveled in a celestial boat, sailing through the sky during the day and through the underworld at night. His journey was not just symbolic, it was a constant battle against chaos. During the day, Ra's boat was visible, a golden disk cutting through the sky. The gods accompanied it, protecting its journey, but it was at night that the real challenge took place. In the underworld, Ra faced Apep, the great serpent. Apep was not a god. He was a force, an ancient presence that existed before creation. He represented pure chaos, the darkness that wanted to swallow everything. He had no definitive form, but he manifested himself as a colossal serpent capable of wrapping his body around the boat. Every night, Ra and his allies faced this enemy, and each time the boat won, the sun would rise again. But there was no guarantee. This fight repeated itself eternally. It was the cycle of resistance. And even though he was a powerful god, Ra needed help. Set, the same god of the desert and instability, was part of the crew. Yes, the same Set who dethroned Osiris, who fought Horus. He was also useful, for in the Egyptian world, even chaos had a function. Set was the only one who could face Apep directly, not because he is good, but because he knows the chaos from within. With his spear, he struck the serpent when it tried to swallow the boat, and so he helped Ra continue his journey. This showed something profound. Even the unstable can have purpose. Egypt did not see the world as a war between good and evil, but like a dance between order and disorder. The solar bark was not just an astronomical symbol, it was the very effort of existence. Every day, a victory. Every night, a threat. But always, a return. This was the Egyptian hope. Not a happy ending, but a continuous restart. That light, even facing eternal darkness, always returns. Even if I have to fight, even if I have to bleed, even if no one sees. Egyptian mythology was not just a set of stories, it was a lens, a way of seeing the world. There was no separation between religion, politics, nature, and myth. Everything was intertwined. The gods did not live in a distant realm. They were in the Nile, in the sun, in the mud, in the body. Everyday life was permeated by the sacred. When the river flooded, it was Osiris being reborn. When it dried, it was Set walking. Every act had meaning. The rituals were not theater. They were reconstructions. With every gesture, the Egyptians tried to repeat what the gods had done in the beginning. Worship was not about pleasing deities. It was about keeping the world running. The bark of Ra had to keep going. The scales of Ma'at had to remain stable. Order depended on repetition. The pharaoh, when ruling, was not just a man with power. He was the personification of divine order. Called the son of Ra, his role was not to command, but to maintain balance. If he ruled well, the harvests would come. If he strayed from Ma'at, plagues would spread. People understood this naturally. Mythology explained what reason could not. Why someone dies young, why the sun returns, why there are conflicts, even between gods. Horus and Set did not represent just a divine dispute. They represented human dilemmas. The son who wants to avenge his father, the brother who envies the other, the doubt between order and force. Isis represented persistence. Nephthys, the invisible welcome. Anubis, the care for those who have departed. Osiris, the possibility of rebirth even after destruction. These figures were not far away. They were in the field, in the house, in the temple, in the breath. Egyptian mythology was both cosmic and intimate. It encompassed the universe and ordinary life. Each death was a reflection of the death of Osiris, each birth a repetition of the emergence of Ra, and so the world turned, not like a straight line, but like a circle, an eternal cycle of birth, loss, return. This vision gave meaning to the pain, to the waiting, to the silence. Everything was part of the whole, and so everything deserved attention. In ancient Egypt, dying did not mean disappearing. It meant changing one's state. Death did not interrupt life. It continued in another form, but for this transition to occur, the body and soul had to be carefully prepared. There was no improvisation. Everything was done according to precise rituals, passed down through the generations. Preserving the body was not vanity. It was a spiritual necessity. The soul needed to recognize the body in the afterlife. The process began immediately after death. The body was washed with water from the Nile. It was both a symbolic and practical gesture. It purified, but also reconnected the deceased to the primordial waters of Nun. Then the embalming began. The internal organs were removed with precision. Each was stored in canopic jars. The stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs were each under the protection of a specific god. The heart was left in the chest. It would be judged before Osiris. The brain, curiously, was discarded. The Egyptians did not see it as the center of consciousness. Intelligence lived in the heart. The body was covered with natron, a natural salt. It would remain that way for weeks, until it was completely dehydrated. Then came the delicate part, wrapping the body in linen strips. Each strip was placed with intention. Some had magical formulas written on them, words that would guide the soul through the underworld. The face was covered with a mask, not to hide, but to preserve identity. The dead could not lose themselves. Finally, the body was placed in a sarcophagus, or in several, one inside the other, like layers of spiritual protection. The tomb was also prepared. It was decorated with scenes from life. The deceased was shown harvesting, fishing, hugging his children. What was on the walls helped to build what would be in the afterlife. Amulets were placed between the bands. Eyes of Horus, scarabs, golden anchors. Each object had a magical function. The Book of the Dead was recited. Not everyone could afford a complete papyrus, but even the humble had access to excerpts. Sometimes they memorized them. The formulas taught the soul how to pass through the gates of the underworld, what to say to each guardian, how to protect itself, how to remember its own name, because forgetting who you are was the worst fate. During the funeral, family members cried, but there was also music and food. It was a cycle, a return. Anubis was invoked. Isis and Nephthys were remembered. Osiris was honored. It was a moment of pain, yes, but also of hope. The body was not discarded. It was treated with reverence, because the body was a temple, and death, passage. For the Egyptians, the dead did not disappear. They changed address, but remained close. Ancestor worship was a bridge between worlds. Keeping the memory of those who had passed away alive was to ensure that they still had a voice, presence, and influence. Forgetting was the true end. Therefore, the names of the dead were preserved with zeal. They were repeated in prayers, carved in stone, inscribed on papyrus. It was common for even the most humble to have at least a small stele with the name of the deceased. The living made offerings to their ancestors: food, drink, flowers, perfumes, not because the dead literally ate, but because the gesture maintained a spiritual bond. The memory strengthened the Ka, the vital energy. The house of the dead was an extension of the house of the living. Many families had small household shrines with images or names of relatives who had passed away. During religious festivals, it was common to visit the tombs. bring bread, beer, and recite prayers. Sometimes they would talk to the deceased in a low voice, asking for advice, protection, or simply telling them how life was going. Ancestors were seen as intermediaries. They knew the world of the living, but now inhabited the world of the dead. They knew how to intercede with the gods. They were guardians, counselors, silent witnesses of everyday life. It wasn't fear, it was coexistence. The Egyptians didn't push death away. They lived with it. They integrated it. Each person wanted to be remembered, to have his name spoken, to have his good deeds recorded, and if possible, to be revered as a beneficent spirit. Some even wrote letters to the dead, papyri with requests, pleas, confessions, as if the connection would never cease. The relationship with ancestors was not just familial, it was social. The people believed that the balance of the community depended on harmony with the dead. If the tombs were neglected, chaos could return. Therefore, even the pharaohs maintained permanent chapels of worship. Priests took care of the daily rites. The sacred flame was kept burning. It was a way of saying, you lived and continue to live through our memories. And so, memory became sacred. Time did not erase. It preserved. Eternity was not a place. It was a state constructed by the memory of the living. For the Egyptians, time was not a straight line that goes from the past to the future. It was a circle, a movement that returns, that repeats, that is reborn. Life was one phase of the cycle, death, another, rebirth, inevitable. This understanding of time was not philosophical. It was lived. It was in everything, in the rising and setting of the sun, in the floods and ebbs of the Nile, in agricultural cycles, in the return of the stars. The most important star was Sirius, called Sopdet by the Egyptians. Its appearance in the sky announced the flooding of the Nile, and with it, the renewal of life. This phenomenon marked the beginning of the year. It was the true Egyptian New Year's Eve. But unlike the noisy modern party, this rebirth was observed with respect. Ra, the sun god, crossed the sky every day and was reborn every morning. It wasn't guaranteed. He had to face the serpent Apep in the underworld, conquer the chaos, and only then return. This eternal movement of being born, dying, and returning was the model for everything. When Osiris was killed and then restored, the Egyptians saw more than a myth. They saw the very pattern of existence. The body may be destroyed, but the essence returns. This cycle did not eliminate pain. The Egyptians suffered. They cried, but they knew that nothing is the end. Eternity was a constant return, not a rest, but a renewal. Even in the court of Osiris, the soul was not condemned forever. It was erased, only if it completely strayed from the order. The rest went with the flow. Even Set, the god of conflict, was part of the cycle. He caused ruptures, yes, but these ruptures opened space for new beginnings. Cyclical time taught patience. What today seems like a ruin, tomorrow could be a seed. That's why the Egyptians didn't destroy what was getting old. They reformed it, they maintained it, they respected the old one, because they knew it would return. The birth of Horus, after the death of Osiris, was a clear reminder. The world goes on, even with losses, with pain, with separation. The wisdom of the cycle is in accepting that everything returns, but never exactly the same. Always a little different, always with mark, like the eye of Horus, restored by Thoth, like the boat of Ra, coming out of the darkness, like the seed that sprouts after the desert. Egypt did not just leave behind pyramids. It left behind a worldview, a way of being, a silence that spans the centuries. The Egyptian spiritual legacy is not only in the stone monuments, but in the idea of continuity, of respect for the invisible, of listening to the slow rhythm of existence. The Egyptian gods have not disappeared. They sleep not because they have been forgotten, but because they fulfill another function. They exist as internal images, archetypes that continue to resonate. Isis, with her unbreakable patience, Osiris, with his fertile death, Horus, with his restored gaze, Thoth, with his careful word, Anubis, with his silent touch, Mot, with her scales that still weigh our days, Set, with his uncomfortable and necessary presence. Each of these names is not restricted to temples or texts. They continue to live on as ideas. Egyptian spirituality taught that the sacred is in everything, in the sunrise, in the act of washing the body, in caring for the dead, in respecting cycles. This way of seeing the world did not require blind faith. It required attention, a willingness to perceive what is behind, to hear what is not said. Temples were not just places of worship, they were representations of the cosmos. Their proportions, their inscriptions, their columns, everything repeated creation. To be there was to be within the body of the universe, and the silence of the gods was respected. They did not always respond, they did not interfere at all times, but their presence was felt like a cool shadow in the heat of the desert. The idea that the sacred does not shout, but whispers, ran through all Egyptian thought. That's why Egypt still fascinates us today. Not just because of its grandeur, but because of its depth, because of the feeling that something there knows more than it says. The gods sleep, but what they awakened in us does not sleep. The idea that the world has rhythm, that death does not end, that memory is a bridge, that the order does not need to be rigid, just constant, and that even in the darkness, there is a path. In the end, everything returns to the beginning, not through failure, but by nature. The Egyptian cycle, so perfectly designed, does not end. It curves back to its point of origin, to Nun, that silent, formless ocean where everything began. Nun is not oblivion, it is rest, a place without weight, without urgency, without destiny. It does not judge, does not demand, does not promise. It simply welcomes. Osiris was the first to cross the threshold and remain. He did not return to reign among the living, but he became the king of the dead, guardian of the passage. And in his kingdom, the Nun is not a threat. He is depth, he is pause. The Egyptians did not fear the Nun. They knew that he does not destroy. He only undoes what is excess. He takes away what is not essential. Returning to Nun was not a punishment. It was a reunion with our origins, with silence, with what we are when we stop trying to be something. Each night, the sun sets on Nun. Each death, a seed that descends to him. And down there, everything rests, in peace. The Nun reminds us that before form, there was vastness, and in that vastness, there was no rush, no demands, just the possibility of being. The world was created from a restlessness within the Nun, but the Nun itself has never been defeated. It is always waiting. In Egyptian mythology, return does not mean defeat. It means acceptance. The body returns to earth. The soul passes through the underworld. Memory finds its rest. And the spirit, perhaps, floats back to the beginning, not to start over as before, but to rest in what is. Nun is the womb of the universe. It is the deepest sleep, the longest breath. The priests knew it, the sacred texts knew it, and the dead, when they entered the tombs, knew it too. That was where the last round began, not towards the end, but towards the original silence, where everything rests, where everything returns, where finally nothing more needs to be said. And now, everything calms down. You have gone through an entire cycle, from creation to oblivion, from the birth of the world to its rest. You have passed by gods who weep, who fight, who wait. You have accompanied the pain of Isis, the silence of Nephthys, the precision of Anubis. You have felt the weight of the scales of Maat. You have seen the solar boat face the serpent night after night, and now you too are preparing to cross. Sleep is not an end. It is an interval, a slow descent into a place where thoughts are less clear, less demanding, where you don't have to decide or respond or understand. You have heard enough for today. The voices of the gods still echo, but softly, like a whisper beneath the water, like the wind between the columns of an ancient temple. Your eyes may already be closed, or almost. Your body sinking a little deeper into the mattress. Your breathing slower, like the Nile on moonless nights. Egyptian mythology does not end. It rests, like you now. And perhaps, even without realizing it, something of that story remained. An image, a gesture, an idea of order that remains, even when everything seems out of place. Osiris sleeps in the underworld, but remains king. Horus watches over the world, even in silence, and you can finally rest. Let the nun receive you, not as oblivion, but as rest. Take a deep breath once again, and if sleep comes, let it. Don't hold back, the boat is already leaving. Good night. May the gods of silence accompany you.